Hi, this is Marie from Underground Crafter, and today I'm going to be sharing with you all about different ways to join motifs. So, what are motifs? They are shapes that you use to join together to make a larger project. They could be squares, triangles, rectangles, octagons, hexagons, even circles. These are probably the most common one that everyone's familiar with is the granny square, which is this kind of 100 and something year old pattern that makes a square that you can join to other squares. So in today's video, I'm going to show you different ways to join motifs together: the mattress stitch, the whip stitch, the slip stitch, the single crochet, and join as you go. And those are kind of 5 pretty common joins, so we're going to learn all of those today. One thing to keep in mind is when you are joining, you want to think about your join before you finish your motif. So some joins will require extra yarn that you might use at the end. Some joins will require you to finish one round early. So you want to really think about the specific type of join you do before you finish. If you didn't think about the join and now you have a big stack of motifs, does that mean you can't join them? No, you still can. You might use a little extra yarn. You might have, more ends to weave in, but you can still do it anyway. So if you're ready, let's dive in to the different joins.
Okay, the first join I'm going to show you is the mattress stitch. So the first thing, when you're going to use a join that involves the yarn needle, you want to fasten off with a yarn tail that's at least 3 times as long as that motif. So here you can see it goes around a little more than 3 times, so that's great. You're going to thread the yarn needle with the yarn tail in this case. You could also use a fresh piece of yarn. If you were going to do that, you'd want to leave about 5 inches extra on each side for weaving in ends. Here you don't have to weave it in on one side because it's attached to the square already. I like using these yarn needles with a bent tip, so that's what I prefer. So for the mattress stitch, you're going to start with, if you were using the yarn from the square or the motif, you're going to start on the opposite square. If you're using a fresh piece of yarn, it doesn't matter which square you start on. And basically for the mattress stitch, you're always going to be working from one square towards the direction of the other square. Okay, so I'm going to start in the bottom corner, and this particular square has 2 chains in each corner. So I'm going to start with the first chain that's closest, and I'm doing this on the front. You can also do this on the back, and I'll show you at the end what it looks like on the other side, so that can give you an idea of which side you prefer. So I'm going to start with that first stitch. I'm going to go from the square towards the other square, and then I'm going to go into the first loop on this side as well, and again from one square towards the other square. And you don't want to pull it very tightly, but you want to have it kind of snug. And then you're going to continue doing that into each stitch. So I'm going to go into the next stitch. Now I'm going through the top loop that is closest to me as I'm working. And that is going to make a slightly visible seam on the front. Not very visible, but you will be able to see it a little bit. I like the look of it. And so that's my preferred way. But at the end, I'm going to show you what it looks like on the back, on the wrong side. And you can decide if you would rather seam your mattress stitch seam on the wrong side, because that's the look you would get on the front. So again, you're going to be going from one stitch, starting from the square you're working, going towards the other square, and then on the next square. And again, you could do the same thing with triangles, circles, any shape, but you're going to go from that motif towards the other one. And you're kind of working back and forth like this. And again, you're not yanking the yarn because you're not trying to kind of crunch it together. You want to have a you want to have it snug, but it doesn't need to be straining the yarn. Because actually when you strain the yarn too much, that's actually creates a weakness, right? It's not actually going to make your seam stronger. It's going to make it weaker if you are, distorting the yarn too much. So this is pretty easy stitch. And as you can see, while it is slightly visible, it's not very visible. And if you had a solid color yarn, it would be even less visible. It's just because where this particular yarn has pops of color, you can see that on the other piece. So I'm getting close to the end here. And as you get to the end, again, you want to keep making sure that your stitches are aligned so that, when I go, for example, I just went through the chain one space on this side, and then I went through the chain one space on that side. So you really want to have your stitches, you want to be working through the same set of stitches if possible. And I'm coming towards the end here. And when I get to the end, remember that I only want to work into the very first chain one space. I don't want to go into the second chain space because that's actually part of the seam I would create on the other side. Okay, so this is my first chain space, and then this is my first chain space on this side. So now the side is joined, and I'm gonna tug it a little bit. All right, so you can see this is the seam. It's not very visible. Again, this is the mattress stitch, and I did on the front loops with the right side up, but I want to show you what it looks like on the wrong side. On the wrong side, you can see that you don't see the seam at all. And so if you prefer this look where there's no visible seam, you would do the exact same thing that I just did with the mattress stitch, except you would work it on the wrong side. And then it would be on the right side that you would see this lack of a visible seam. Before you would go on to the next square, you would want to weave in this yarn tail, but I'm not going to do that for the sake of time. I'm going to show you another join. Okay, so this is another join that you also do with with the yarn tail, and this is called the whip stitch. Okay, so I'm gonna put the yarn into the yarn needle, and the whip stitch I work on the back. So what I'm gonna do is put these two squares right sides together, and I'm going to do this all on the back on the wrong side. So same thing, I'm going to start in the first chain one that's closest, but with the whip stitch I'm always going to be moving in the same direction. So I'm going to start from close to me going to away from me. You never really want to be pulling a needle towards yourself, even a blunt needle like this. So I'm going to work in every stitch. I'm going through what would be the back loops of the stitch, going from me to away from me. And again, I'm lining up the stitches and I'm going through each stitch across. Now, some of you may be saying, what if I used a pattern where I use different squares, let's say, or triangles or hexagons that are all the same size, but they don't have the same exact number of stitches on each side? Well, we'll get to that in a minute because there is a solution for that. So again, you're going to go from you, away from you. So from you, moving away from you, always in the same direction with the whip stitch, unlike the mattress stitch where we're sort of going back and forth. And the whip stitch you can also use for a lot of other kinds of joins. You'll often see it used with crochet toys. So you may be familiar with it already if you've made a lot of toys. Okay, and I'm getting close to the end here. Again, I'm working on these outer loops, and the reason for that is I am trying to make this a more invisible seam. So if I'm working on the outside loop here and the outside loop here, that means these two center loops that are not having a stitch in them are going to be what's visible on the front. And then again, I'm going to end it in that first chain of my chain two space. Okay, so this is the wrong side. So I'm going to show you, you can see like a small ridge there with the stitches. But now let's look on the front. and you'll see it's basically an invisible seam. So both the mattress stitch and the whip stitch create essentially an invisible seam. So it's your choice of whether you want to work them on the front or on the back. And again, if you were actually joining this right now, you would weave in this yarn tail. So this particular join that I'm going to do now is a slip stitch join, and I'm just actually going to pull out where I had joined the square so that I can have the yarn loose there. Okay. All right. So at the end here, at the end of this particular square, I had my chain 2, and then I joined with a slip stitch. So I'm just going to do that again so that I have this loop on my hook. So for the slip stitch join, I also like doing this on the back. This is a sturdier join. This is the one I usually use when I'm working on a baby blanket. So again, this is one you're going to do on the back, which means you're going to have the two right sides facing each other, and you're going to work on the back. I typically start with a chain 1. Okay, now I'm going to start, as always, in the first chain 1 space on each square. So they're going to be lined up. You'll have 3 loops on your hook, and then you're just going to do a slip stitch, which is a yarn over and pull through all the loops on your hook. Okay, just like with the whip stitch, I'm going to be working on the 2 outer loops. So the back loop here and the back loop here, and I'm going to keep joining that with a slip stitch. So again, it's a yarn over and pull through all the loops on your hook. And again, you want to make sure you're aligning the stitches, that you're always working through both layers. It's pretty easy to accidentally just kind of work a slip stitch into one stitch and then realize later that you didn't actually go through both layers. So do try to keep this in mind if this is something you're doing, you know, while watching TV or waiting online or something. Try to keep your eye on it. But as I was saying, I prefer the slip stitch for baby blankets because it makes a little bit of a sturdier join that holds up to a lot more washing. I feel like baby blankets are washed, you know, 50 times more than the average blanket. So because of that, I like to use this slip stitch, which is, you know, not totally visible on the front, but it's a bit sturdier than some of those seaming joins. I also find that it's a little bit easier to crochet something together rather than to seam it together with a needle. So I'm ending in my last, the first chain 1. I'm keeping the other chain 1 for the other side. Okay, and then this little piece, again, you would weave it in. So let's look at how the slip stitch looks on the back. You can see that there's actually kind of like, you can see the surface of the chain here, and it creates a little bit more texture. So it's something you'll definitely feel. But again, on the right side, it's basically invisible if you worked it on the back. Now I'm going to show a single crochet join, and this is usually more of a decorative join. So you would do it on the front so that people can see it. So I am going to grab some yarn, okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the wrong side of each square so that I'm looking at the right side. And I'm going to start in the corner space. I'm going to put my hook into the first chain of each corner space. And then I'm going to join with a slip stitch. And I'm going to start with a chain 1. And now going back into that same stitch for the start, I'm going to go through both loops, and I'm going to draw up a loop, and then I'm going to yarn over and go through 2 loops, a single crochet. So for this one, I'm working it on the front. I want it to be visible, okay? So what I'm going to do is these outer loops, or you can choose the inner loops. It depends on the look that you want, but either way, this is going to be visible. You're not trying to hide this. So I'm going, for this case, the 2 outer loops, and again, I'm going to yarn over and pull through both loops, and then yarn over and pull through both loops. So again, kind of inserting your hook, yarning over and going through both loops, and then yarning over and going through both loops. and you're going to do that all the way across. Now the single crochet seam is it's like I said, it's more of a decorative thing because you're going to see it. It's also very sturdy, so I do love using this for something that's going to get washed a lot, like the kids blanket is a great, or pet blanket even, that you know you're going to wash a lot. This is great because, you know, the single crochet is a very sturdy stitch and it's going to hold up under a lot of pressure, which, you know, some blankets go through and others don't, right? So I'm going to keep working this all the way across, and then we'll take a look at how the single crochet seam comes together. And it's kind of a fun one. Now, but there is a couple of tricks to this, so I'm going to show you in a moment when we get this done so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so I am now, as always, ending in the first chain on the next side, and ta-da! Okay, so this you can see it sticks right up, right? It's like almost, it's a row of crochet. So it's very visible. It has a really cool look to it. On the back, also invisible. So technically, if you were just worried about sturdiness, you could do a single crochet join on the back. People would feel it, but they wouldn't see it. But usually it's used for decorative. Now see how all the loops are facing in the same direction. What that kind of means is when you're joining with this decorative single crochet stitch, you're gonna wanna always start on the same side, right? Like you're gonna wanna, what I'm saying is join the next square starting here, so that I'm crocheting in the same direction, so that all these stitches are going to be in the same direction. You don't want to join the next square, let's say here, and join it this way, because then what's going to happen is each row is going to be zigzagging around in different directions. So you do have to be a little more attentive to how you join them, whereas with these other techniques, you just don't even have to think about that at all. And the same thing when you're done, you would fasten off and then you would weave in the yarn tail on the wrong side. Okay, so all the joins that I've showed you so far, you can use them on any type of motif. It could have any kind of edging. This last one I'm going to show you, which is called Join As You Go, really only works with a motif where the last round has chain one spaces. And the reason for that is because you're going to actually join into those spaces. So for this one, I have finished this first square completely. And then the second square is, you can see it's one round smaller. That's because I'm going to join it as I go. So I'm going to start this round, which for me is a chain one and 3 double crochets into the same chain one space. And then I'm going to chain one, skip these 3 double crochets and do 3 double crochets in the next chain one space. This is the classic granny square pattern that probably a lot of you are familiar with. And then chain one, skip the 3 double crochets, and then 3 double crochets into the next chain one space. And you're basically going to continue the pattern until you get to the first corner, so chain one. Now typically in this corner you would do 3 double crochets, 2 chains, and 3 more double crochets. So I'm going to start the corner with the 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to get 1 chain in, because remember, we're always trying to connect our sides with the inner chains. All right, so now I'm going to get this other piece. I'm going to put them wrong sides together so that the join will be on the right side. Now this is where I would normally do my chain one space, and instead I'm going to do a single crochet into the other square. So I'm going to insert my hook into the corner chain space. I'm going to yarn over and draw up a loop, and yarn over and draw through 2 loops, and that's a single crochet. That's a stand-in for that second chain of the chain 2 space. Now I'm going to work my 3 double crochets into this unfinished square like I was going to do. 1, 2, 3. Now this would be the part that I would typically put my chain 1, but instead I'm going to join with a single crochet into the chain 1 space on the other square. So I'm going to insert my hook, yarn over, draw up a loop, yarn over, and draw through 2 loops. Okay, so now as if that was the chain 1 space, I'm going to work 3 double crochets into this chain 1 space. And so basically you're working the pattern almost the same, but with replacing your chain 1 spaces with a single crochet to the other stitch. So you can, to the other square, I should say. You can do this on any pattern. So any pattern that you have that ends with a round that has chain 1 spaces, you just want to finish the first square or hexagon or whatever it is, and then on the other one you're going to stop around early, and on the sides where you're joining it you're just going to substitute this chain 1 space for a single crochet join to the chain 1 space on the finished square. So now we're getting to our corner again, and I'm going to do my first 3 double crochets, 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to join with a chain 1 space. So I'm going to insert my hook and make a single crochet to join. And since this was a chain 2, I will actually do 1 more chain, and then I'm going to finish with 3 double crochets into this stitch. Now, one of the things people like about Join As You Go is it's pretty easy to do. It doesn't use up a lot of extra yarn compared to other joins, but it does create a kind of small gap, right? Because you're only joining on the stitches where the chain 1 space would be. You really want to think about if you're using the right kind of square. So if it was a square that, for example, had like this whole side and then just 1 chain space in the middle, it would probably be too much of a gap. It wouldn't be that sturdy, so you wouldn't want to use a Join As You Go. Now, sometimes people wonder, well, how do I join another square, right? Because when we make blankets, they're not all in rows, right? So how do I join it here? It's the same concept. You're just going to be replacing the chain spaces with a single crochet to that other stitch, but just make sure that you have the wrong sides together and the right sides facing out.
Well, I hope you enjoyed doing all the different joins and you found one that's new to you or a different way of doing a join that you're familiar with.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed your project. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're watching this video. Have a great day.